Fred Turner. That was the name I had in mind for the position of corporate operations man. I have a mental snapshot on file that showed Fred. I have a mental snapshot on file that shows Fred. I have a mental snapshot on file that shows Fred, who one day would become president and then chairman of the board of the McDonald's. John Turner, as he looked when he first walked into my office in February 1956. He was a little more than a kid, 23 years old. He had a baby face and the most infectious grin I'd seen in years. Most infectious grin I'd seen in years. He and another young fellow named Joe Post came in to answer an ad I had run in the Chicago Tribune of franchises. He had a baby face and the most infectious grin I'd seen in years. He and another young fellow named Joe Post came in to answer an ad I had run in the Chicago Tribune on franchises. Fred and Joe and two other members of their families. Fred and Joe and two other members of their families had formed what they called the Post-Tribune Corporation. Fred and Joe and two other members of their families had formed what they called the Post-Turner Corporation. Their aim was to busy a McDonald's franchise, which Fred and Joe would operate. I gladly took their down payment in the license fee and suggested that it would be a good thing if they learned the ropes by working in the Des Plaines store while waiting to get their own location going. Fred took me up on it. He went to work immediately for $1 an hour. He was also getting $85 a week from his family group. And on advance, they agreed to consider part of the cost. On advance, they agreed to consider part of the cost of getting into business. Although Fred was obligated to pay it back eventually. Fred took me up on it. He went to work immediately for $1 an hour. He was also getting $85 a week from his family group. On advance, they agreed to consider part of the cost of getting into the business. Although Fred was obligated to pay it back eventually. Fred was a terrific worker. He had a natural feel for the rhythms and priorities that make a McDonald's restaurant click. He had a natural feel for the rhythms and priorities that make McDonald's restaurant click. This talent quickly showed up in the reports I got from Ed McLuckie. This talent quickly showed up in the report I got from Ed McLuckie. Even Art Jacobs, who spent very little time around the store, noticed Fred. I could see he was a born leader, and I was happy that he was going to be one of my franchisees. He was going to be one of my franchisees. At least I thought he was until the Post-Turner Corporation began having problems. One of their basic rules was that the decision on where their franchise was to be located, had to be unanimous. One of their basic rules was that the decision on where their franchise was to be located had to be unanimous. They could get 2 votes on a number of sites, and occasionally 3, but never could be 4 agree. I gathered that Fred was getting pretty disgusted with the situation. Disgusted. I gathered that Fred was getting pretty disgusted with the situation. After a time, he quit accepting the family group's subside and took a second job selling Fuller Bushes. He was afraid they never would find a location, and he didn't want to go deeply in depth in the enterprise. Late in the fall of 1956, Bill Barr, operator of a newly opened store on Cicero Avenue in Chicago, asked if he could have Fred as his manager. Yes, you can, I told him. But remember that I want him in the corporation. When the time comes, I am going to take him. The time came sooner than I anticipated. We had a difficult situation developing down in Kentucky, Illinois, with one of the pieces of property we were acquiring for franchise realty. The time came sooner than I expected. We had a difficult situation